Hey there, Blazer fans, and welcome to a special mini episode of the Dragon's Den, a podcast for those that bleed green and gold. This episode's a little out of the ordinary because I won't have a guest on, and I'm releasing this on a day that's not a Friday or Saturday, but I wanted to have a special tribute to my dad. Morris, or Butch as he was known to many, exemplified the slogan that I use for this podcast as he was a diehard bleed green and gold UAB fan. Unfortunately, 2 years ago today, the day that I record this podcast, which is September 24th, I lost my dad while we were on a family trip to the UAB Tulane game in New Orleans in 2021. Some of you were fortunate to know my dad, and I always wanted to have him on this podcast to share his stories as a Blazer fan because he was around since the very beginning of the UAB athletics. Ultimately, I wanted to do this episode to share his story that he never got to share. So I will share some of his story, some of my memories with my dad with you here, and I have a special message from a longtime friend and a fellow UAB fan, Steve Rutherford, as well. My dad was born on the south side of Birmingham and grew up playing basketball, baseball, and football. And from what I could tell, he was pretty good at them. He grew up going to games out at Legion Field back when Auburn and Alabama would play some of their football games there. And of course, the old Birmingham Americans and Birmingham Vulcans, the World Football League. He was a diehard Indianapolis Colts fan, even when they were from Baltimore, and his favorite player was Burt Jones. He was also a big LA Dodgers fan, and every time he saw the Kirk Gibson home run from the 1988 World Series, he would always tell me exactly where he was when it was happening. He went to UAB back when the campus building still had names like University Building number 1, 2, 3, and 4. He grew up an Alabama fan, but to quote my dad, he eventually saw the light and switched to UAB pretty early on and stuck with the Blazers through thick and thin. He met my mom, and eventually my older sister, Melanie, came along, then me, then my younger sister, Jillian. And of all things that got passed down to me from my dad, one of our biggest bonds came in sports. I wanted to play sports, and he taught me everything he knew, and I grew up playing all the sports that he did. As I got older, we went to as many UAB games as humanly possible for a family of five. My first ever road game was at LSU, and we defeated the Bayou Bengals 13-10 in 2000. Just before Rhett Gallego went onto the field for the game-winning field goal, my dad told me he ran down the stairs at Tiger Stadium to talk to Gallego before he went on the field. He told me he called out to Rhett. Rhett looked at my dad, and my dad said, "I don't ask for much in life, but please make this kick." And Rhett said he had it. One other story my dad always liked to tell me is about how when I was really little, I was sitting in his lap for one game, and I had no idea where the players were going when they were leaving the field for halftime. And to keep it simple for me, he just told me that the players were going to the bathroom. Some road trips for games were just me and my dad. He used to always quiz me on college team nicknames on drives to places like Starkville and Memphis. Growing up and going to games at Legion Field for UAB, we always had a routine to walk around the stadium at halftime and throw the football out that I always brought. Thankfully, the stadium was big enough to where I could run deep routes on the concourse and not run into anyone. We would always go down and throw near the UAB tunnel until the players came out and high-fived them and wished them well on the way back out onto the field. We used to always talk about the story of back in 2003 when UAB played Southern Miss at Legion Field and over 42,000 people showed up, that I was pretty upset as a kid because we couldn't walk around at halftime and throw the football because there was too many fans and we were afraid that we were going to hit somebody. My dad always told me that I needed to be a little bit more appreciative that so many people showed up to the game. During my elementary school days, he asked me if I wanted to be a ball boy for the UAB men's basketball team, and of course I said yes. We lived in Montgomery growing up, so we would make the hour and a half drive up practically every weekend and even some weeknight to help fulfill my duties on the court. When UAB defeated number 3 Memphis in 2006, I was on the court and I kept looking up at him during the game because I was so excited. When we finally won, I remember looking up at him, and as the fans ran past me, he was waving for me to run on the court with all the fans. For my 13th birthday, my family and I went up to Kentucky so my dad and I could go to the UAB Kentucky game in 2007. Thankfully, Robert Vaden went off for 33 points to beat the Wildcats. And on the way out, in a sea of blue, my dad gave the biggest Go Blazers you would ever hear. Going into my teenage years, we continued going to the games through good and bad. I learned how to heckle referees from him, and I tried my best to match his intensity on the chants. I picked up his habit of singing "Turn Out the Lights, the Party's Over" from the classic country song "The Party's Over" by Willie Nelson when games got out of hand for the teams that we loved, a habit that he learned from legendary football commentator Don Meredith. In his final years, my dad and my stepmom had my little brother Drew. He made sure that Drew was there for basketball and football home games and road trips before he could even get out of a baby carrier, and we carried on the halftime routines with my little brother in the last few years at Legion Field before we moved to Protective Stadium. My dad had his struggles with health over the last decade or so, but he tried to not let it stop him from going to games and being with the family, all while working as much as he could as a respiratory therapist at UAB. It was fitting that his final days were doing what we always loved, being on a UAB football road trip. His final day was about as perfect as we wanted. We walked around New Orleans, ate some good food, went to our favorite sports shop near the quarter, sat near the Mississippi River and listened to music, and went to find Tulane Stadium to plan out the next morning. Unfortunately, as we settled in that night at our hotel, he lay down in bed and then he was gone. My stepmom and I did everything that we could to bring him back, and paramedics got there quickly to take him to a local hospital where he later officially passed away. It was believed to be a pulmonary embolism that tragically took one of the brightest lights in my life away from me. That was the longest night of my life as we headed back to Alabama to start the process of arranging services. The following night, I watched with a heavy heart as UAB beat Tulane, and I cried because I knew that my dad wanted that win so badly, and we should have been there with him. It was hard in the weeks following because UAB had its first game at Protective Stadium, and we went without my dad, who waited so long for a new stadium and was so excited to see us emerge from that tunnel against Liberty. But through it all, we know he's always with us in spirit, and you can always catch me and my family members at games wearing Win for Butch buttons on our UAB attire. I could tell stories about my dad for hours on end, but one of my dad's longtime friends, Steve Rutherford, was around long before I was, and he shared some great moments with him. I reached out to Steve and I wanted to give him the opportunity to share them. Here's the message from Steve Rutherford. When I think of my friendship with your dad, one of the main things I remember is his love for UAB. Our passion for UAB sports fed off each other. It started in the late 70s while we were in high school, continued as UAB students, then as proud alumni. Before message boards and social media, when big news dropped, the first call we made was to each other to discuss it. All the way back to when there was talk of putting together an athletic program and the hiring of Gene Bartow, we excitedly followed the news and shared with each other what we heard. During UAB's first season, we went to many games together. At school once, we were putting together grab bags for a fundraiser, and it was Butch's idea to call the UAB athletic department to see if we could get some swag, pencils, keychains, etc., with the new UAB logo. We called and Gene Bartow answered the phone. The secretary was out to lunch. Not only did he give us cheap swag, but he threw in tickets to the upcoming basketball games. Confession, though, not all the tickets made it into the grab bags. Some of the Blazer moments that we witnessed together: UAB's first basketball game versus Nebraska, UAB's first big NCAA tournament win versus Kentucky in Tuscaloosa. We got in trouble for missing church on Sunday, but Butch said it felt like church. There was a lot of shouting and praising Jesus after the win. UAB making the Elite Eight in 1982, playing number one DePaul in a 17,000 plus packed BJCC arena. Several games and Sun Belt tournaments in Birmingham while we were students at UAB. 1993, traveling back to Tuscaloosa for the UAB win over Alabama in the NIT and dealing with angry Alabama fans. In 1996, traveling to Auburn for UAB's first D1 football game. We got interviewed by a TV crew about the game along the way at a gas station. Not sure if it ever aired. And in 2000, UAB beating LSU in Baton Rouge. After I moved out of town and jobs and families changed our priorities, we didn't get to go to as many games together, but the passion and the mutual connection to the Blazer memories we made did not die. We just made new ones with our families, and Butch did an excellent job of creating new devout fans and carrying on traditions. Thank you, Steve, for that kind message. As I mentioned in the beginning, I wanted to record this episode to share some of my dad's story. And trust me, I barely scratched the surface of some of the memories I have with him and the stories that he told me. But I also wanted to share this message. Cherish every day you have with your loved ones. Don't take any moment for granted. I struggle just as much as anyone at times being present with the people I love, but every day I'm trying to get better. I hope that when you're with the ones that you love, whether it's just sitting at home, at a game, or wherever, that you will make the most of every moment. Leave it all on the field, as many coaches would say, and have no regrets because tomorrow is never promised to us. I hope you'll do as my dad did and live for every moment by doing the things that make you happy, care less about what others think, and try to make someone smile in your everyday life. I'll close the episode by thanking the Blazer family and many others for getting my family and me through a lot in the last couple of years. We are truly thankful, and we hope that you'll help us carry on his legacy by cheering as loud as possible at every game you attend. I love you, Dad. I miss you every day. If you've made it this far, I thank you for listening, and you will hear from me for the next episode of The Dragon's Den I'm planning to release this upcoming weekend. Good night, and go Blazers.